You're on.
Okay, great. It's so nice to see you all, folks that I know and new folks. Thank you for coming and spending your evening with me. I don't know if any of you came to the other presentations that I did, mostly through the Senior Center on landscape painting and portraiture and ceramics. This will probably be slightly different. We'll certainly be looking at some aesthetic considerations. At the same time, we'll be looking at how we might raise our own ecological awareness. So I'm going to share the screen and put up my PowerPoint because I think you'd rather look at that than me. We'll see what happens here. And okay, we're going to slideshow start moving. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see it okay? I'm just gonna, well, you're all muted, so you can't tell me. I'm hoping you can.
Yes,
let me look.
It looks great.
Okay, great. Great. We're going to go back here. Okay, so environmental art really is kind of a broad term, and it encompasses quite a bit. But the idea is still the reflecting on our relationship to nature. So within environmental art, there's landscapes, which we're probably very familiar with, nature-based art, which is kind of aesthetically focused, using natural materials to construct beauty, land art, earthworks, large conceptual works that are made outside. And what we'll probably focus on mostly is eco art. And that's really kind of the conceptual investigation and the aesthetic considerations of many of the issues about ecological justice. The idea of really that it's addressing sustainability and addressing real world problems. And as you'll see, many of the artists are interdisciplinary in nature and using sciences and philosophy and history and ecology and psychology and so forth. I don't know if folks are familiar with this. This has been around for a while, but it does help differentiate between the sort of anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. And it's they're pretty obvious distinctions between them. And one big one is just that with eco art, there's kind of an urging of an alignment with nature. It still will retain that sense of beauty, but at the same time, having much more of a kind of an ethical consideration and thinking about sustainable features like resource management, watersheds, population impact, species habitat, and so forth. So my goal with this presentation is really to honor the power of art to initiate conversation and awareness, and looking at that relationship between beauty and ethical behavior. Perhaps maybe even reflecting on our own paradigms, our own consumer practicing, and looking at the ways, as I mentioned, in the collaboration with other disciplines, and perhaps ideally sparking an idea for something that we can do in our community. And I know that many of you or some of you are educators, and maybe you can bring that back into your world. So these are the three questions that I'd like you to be thinking about as we go along. What is my footprint? What are my emotional, spiritual, cognitive, ethical, aesthetic responses to the works that we'll be looking at? And what are effective ways to turn ecological awareness into action? Okay, now why am I not being able to? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out why I can't go to the next slide. I think I'm going to escape. Oh. I'm going to stop sharing and go back and see if I can figure this out.
That sounds good. You-
I apologize. Let's see. I don't know why it's blocked. All right. Oh, here we go. It's unblocked. So hopefully, yeah, good. We're good. Sorry about that. So we're going to start with actually looking at one that might be considered a nature-based artist. Andy Goldsworthy, many of you may have seen his work. And he works with natural materials and has this sense of ephemeralism where he'll create pieces and they will eventually disappear. So his medium is snow and ice and leaves and grass and stones and clay and so forth. He's still around, still producing work. Rivers and Tides was a movie that was made about some of his work. Here's a couple of other images. Robert Smithson, again, many of you have seen the spiral jetty at Salt Lake City. He really exploring the conceptual and physical boundaries of landscape and looking at our place in the world. And this is made with rocks and mud. And then Nancy Holt's work is in Utah's Great Basin Desert. And she's arranged these cylinders, fairly long and wide, made of concrete. And she worked with astronomers to align these cylinders with the winter and summer solstice and with certain constellations. And the idea is to kind of walk through them. And together with these artists, they're still in the kind of the land artist, conceptual places. Michael Heiser's work is in the Swiss Alps, and he really wanted to develop this area to gaze and be connected to the surrounding area, made with steel. And Christo's work, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in terms of Grand Canyon and the flags in Central Park and so forth. And this was down in Miami, around the islands in Biscay Bay, using about 600,000 square meters of this pink fabric. And he had to go through the permission with the government agencies to have this. And it's interesting because there were about 120 people who were in these inflatable boats to keep the fabric where it was. So the intent wasn't necessarily to raise ecological awareness. Ironically, when it was removed, there was about 40 tons of rubbish that washed up on the islands that was floating around on it. So the artist up to this date, to this point, I would not consider necessarily eco-artists. They're using the outside very significantly to address issues of beauty and to bring awareness, but not necessarily thinking about your own practice, in a sense. We'll start looking at Lynn Hull, and she's really concerned about the loss of biodiversity and wants to create models for more urgent social and environmental issues. So unlike the whole piece, which you saw on the Swiss Alps, this hydroglyph is, these are kind of stone drawings. They resemble the ancient petroglyphs. But the idea here is to catch rain, and it's providing precious water for wildlife. So it's very intentional design on that. The lightning raptor roost is something that she's also very concerned about, which is the endangered raptors, and wanted to, and thinking that they spend too much time around large transmission lines. So she found some objects and wanted to make these very natural, and consulted with biologists to make sure that for the certain specifications so that the bird would feel very comfortable. And she's also done a variety of different things in making owl houses and migration mileposts. Daniel Dancer's work, this is quite interesting. He documents pieces from above, and the circle piece, you might try to guess what they are. And a couple times I might ask you to think about what they are. But these are catalogs that he collected that were sent to his home in one holiday season, and really wanting to bring that awareness to the logging of the forest and all of the paper pulp that turns into direct mailers. Ironically, the funds from the paper pulp fund some of the schools in Washington, but he also wanted to make sure that people were aware of just the destruction of and the problems about clearing. The piece on the right is his concern about endangered species, and he has uses up to 4,000 people to work with him, and they're all wearing these clothes to create these pieces that he's designed. And he takes these from the air, but he wants them to be spontaneous. He takes one shot, and he doesn't want any second rehearsals. It's just one shot, and that's what he gets from this, which is interesting. Ruth Wallen is an interdisciplinary artist, very concerned about ecological and social justice and wanting to raise probing questions and the kind of the patterns of our lives. And she uses renewable materials, and this is kind of a combination of art and function. The dew flower is collecting water in the arid mountainous areas in California, and the fog loom also is a way to harvest water. Not sure why this keeps freezing. It's not good.
I'm
I don't understand why this is freezing, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I can't offer you any help. I'm gonna quick look.
I don't know if it's from your end or my end. Oh, it can't be from your end. I will try to escape and go back to stop sharing again and see what happens. I don't have it worked fine. There we go. Maybe that's what I just need to do, and I apologize. This is, again, the same artist, and here she's concerned about some disappearing frogs and asking the question, well, what impact does this have on our environment and sense of survival if frogs are disappearing? She, again, is very interdisciplinary oriented. Now, for something completely different.
I think you need to share your screen again, Jonathan.
Oh, bloody heck. Okay, let's see. Let's, all right. So what are you seeing now? I'm not seeing
just
me.
Seeing you. Well, I'm seeing all of us, but I'm not seeing your screen.
Okay, this is really, I can't get, oh, here we go. All right.
You are taking technology obstacles in stride, so thank you. I'm sorry. It's
yeah, I just
and now you're muted.
now I'm not.
Now you're not.
Can you see this?
Yes,
What do you,
thank you.
okay,
I'm seeing Ruth
all
Wallen.
right.
There we go. Awesome.
You've seen Ruth Wallen and the frogs, and
Yep.
do you now see these paintings?
I see Antarctica.
Did you see this painting before? I mean,
the frog ones? No,
yeah.
we didn't see the frog ones.
Okay, so you just heard me talking about the frogs and had no idea what I was talking about. So
Yes.
This is her way to raise our awareness of endangered species and thinking about the impact on what that may mean for us. And here, putting in some design on a milk carton, and also her sort of fun sense of, if frogs sicken and die, what will happen to the princess? Zaria Foreman, these may look like photographs, but they're not. These are actually pastel drawings. And her intent is to really look at how small we are when confronted with powerful forces of nature. And she travels to remote areas, Antarctica, Greenland, Arctic Canada, and so forth, to collect these images, and then will painstakingly create these pieces, and they're fairly large. Again, not only bringing attention to the slowly disappearing ice caps, but just also bringing a sense of humility to who we are. Kay Wallenstick is an Indigenous artist, and she asked the questions, where are all the generations? And thinking about the colonization of Europeans on what we might call her land, Indigenous land, and the impact both on the land and the people that were inhabiting that land. And she's very clear in saying, in 1492, we were 20 million and now we're 2 million. So she's really looking at it. And the piece on the right is connected to the southwest landscape, and intentionally puts in a shadow to kind of show the demise of the land that she was used to. Mark Messersmith is looking at endangered animals and the shrinking natural environment, intentionally framed this work and keeping it contained, really wanting us to think about what it means to be stewards of the land and animals. And I looked up this word because I didn't know what it was, philosopher. And it's basically a person who has only a superficial knowledge of philosophy, or who feigns a knowledge that he or she does not possess. And I think that that's a pretty wise statement, thinking about our relationship to the environment. Ellie Irons, these flight lines have grown out of her interest in the shifting landscape, but in this case, the landscape is above. So she's sort of concerned about the skies, and that it's home not only for birds, but right now for planes and satellites and drones. And so in considering this sort of shifting above landscape, if you will, she's created these lines of what the activity is up there and how it's evolving over time. We're going to be looking at some photographs now, and David Maisel takes photographs from airplanes, and really has this sense of kind of the planetary autopsy, really looking at the consequences of our appetites, of our consumption, and what we do to the earth. It's similar to what anthropologists say, that if you want to learn about a civilization, just look at what it leaves behind. The mining project on the left is from Butte, Montana, just kind of filling up with filling poison water with lots of cyanide and sulfuric acid, and just contaminating the surrounding groundwater. The lake project is not that different. It's in the Sierra Mountains in California. And this was from a lake that was diverting water to Los Angeles. And then eventually the lake was depleted, exposing a lot of mineral flats in an arid landscape. And so even though the water continues to supply LA, it's leaving a bunch of microscopic particles and so forth that the sort of bacteria that's turning red. So these are kind of, on the one hand, they're nice images. They're really beautiful images. And then when you find out what they are, it's really quite disturbing. And this is true with Benjamin Grant's work. And we think about, again, what is our footprint? And he's asking us to complement these images that we may not see when we're here on our local area and on the ground, but when we have a broader perspective, it really showcases the impact on the landscape. This uranium mine is in Niger in Africa. It's a part of a French nuclear mining that was extracting uranium. And tailings is from an iron ore mining operation in Michigan, where there's, again, this slurry is mixing water with a bunch of nasty chemicals and so forth. And they're fairly large areas. This isn't like, microscopic and so forth. In one way, we can look at our footprint as how we are colonizing the earth. These are really interesting pieces by John Sabra that he's using the toxic runoff from the Ohio River region, and that leave a lot of sludge and the same kind of waste that we saw in the previous slides. But in this case, he's sort of extracting the material and making paint pigments from them. So these are, various pieces that these pigments of yellows and reds have come from the oxidizing these sludge pieces in the mines. And he goes through a whole process to create these pigments, and then paints these images. And in fact, he will sell these with the intent of the money going back and raising awareness and which is, I think, a pretty neat thing. And so he's got this pieces, and he's got this other piece. The one on the left is much more about coal. And the maps piece is looking at kind of digital interface of the scorched earth. But I think these are, again, wonderful, wonderful images to look at. And then when you realize what they are, they're quite striking. Bertansky shoots from high altitudes, these very sweeping views of landscape that have been altered by industry. And they're fairly compromised in environments. There's an incredible contrast to these, that you're looking at sort of soft and hard and linear and curve, and then wilderness and civilization and growth and destruction. I mean, this is the footprints that we leave behind. And again, when we throw out a tire, it's one tire. When we see all the tires, it makes a bit of a difference. Okay, some of you may have seen this, and for those who haven't, you can take a second and think about, what is this? that we are looking at. Now you can be sure to know what they are. So Chris Jordan is really asking us to feel the environment issues and think about our consumption. So what you are looking at in his photographic image are 426,000 cell phones that we retire every day. So again, this is just kind of bringing to an alarm what we use and don't think about, that sense of obsolescence. So I'm going to show you a couple of these pieces. This that you probably may know as The Birth of Venus by Botticelli, but you may think that again, he is creating these images of a particular number. And maybe you can pick up on this, 240,000 plastic bags that the world consumes every 10 seconds. And this is obviously on Seurat. And in case you guessed it, these are aluminum cans, 160,000 aluminum cans used in every 30 seconds in the US. And this is the final one. Again, kind of an interesting image. You can take a guess as to what they are. Yes, they are plastic cups. 1 million plastic cups used on airplanes in America every 6 hours. So these photographs are really seen as kind of portals to cultural self-inquiry. You know, how many plastic cups do I use? And can it change paradigms? This is his quote that he said in a TED Talk. The biggest tragedy of all is that we are in denial about how our consumer lifestyle is sapping our own spirits. We are killing ourselves. Not very uplifting. Ada Silova is from Kyrgyzstan. She's a street artist, and here she's asking us to think about consumption in a different way and what we eat. And if you can pick up on these images, she's reminding us of what we throw out into the world eventually ends up inside of us, both physically and metaphorically. She also wants to bring attention to kind of a waste management dilemma in Kyrgyzstan, where migrants will scavenge through dumps for recyclable products that can be resold, but at the same time, they're exposing themselves to toxic waste. Chris Doyle, really interesting paintings. And the top one, you might recognize some of those artifacts, the kind of discarding junk and televisions and what else is there? Oil rigs and various things, cabinets, that refrigerators, things from maybe a past generation that now might be things like computers and printers and tablets and phones and so forth. Asking us the question, well, what kind of a history are we creating? You know, who does this? And then the bottom one is a little bit more of an apocalypse sense of our management of, you know, overconsumption and maybe overpopulation. But maybe do these pieces help us pause and make us think individually how we can lessen the waste stream? I mean, that's really one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. Mary Mattingly explores issues of climate change and displacement and combines photography and site-specific stuff and performance. And here on her right, she's bound up basically all of her possessions and thinking again as a boulder and kind of moving it through space as a migrant might be creating or might be hoarding their work or their possessions as they move from place to place, being displaced. And also bringing to attention, you know, what is it that, what are my possessions? What are my toys that I have? And then her microsphere is her interest in looking at ways, environments, more portable and adaptable homes, and thinking about the various, the frequent floods and hurricanes and drafts and so forth, and how we might survive those. And I'm thinking, well, not necessarily survive a hurricane in that home, but maybe post-hurricane. See if you can think about what these two artists are using as materials. Well, if you guessed umbrellas, you're absolutely right. So we've all experienced that umbrella that is flipped out, but we know what's inside the umbrella. And these are pieces these are umbrellas that have been discarded. And these people have collected them and created this. They're both architects, and they created these habitats on 100+ bottles to float. What I really appreciate about them is that they were working with teens to put this together. They combined teens and architecture interns to create these pieces. Some of you may have seen Wheatfield by Agnes Deans, and this is planted on 2 acres near Wall Street and the World Trade Center. You can see actually the World Trade Center in the background. And for a while, she weeded and irrigated and cultivated this oasis to bring attention to the relationship between rural America and urban America. The pyramids of conscious, she's really talking about the issue of water and our maybe lack of attention to the need for water over time. And these are all filled up with different ingredients. One is filled with clean water. One is filled with water polluted from the Rio Grande. One with crude oil. And actually the other one is not filled, but it is mirrors with the intent for you to reflect on yourself and look at how you feel and respond to these other pyramids. They're quite, these are quite tall. This tree mountain was an incredible collaboration, 11,000 trees planted, ideally with 11,000 people. And that's supposedly going to be protected for hundreds of years to prevent the clearing of the land, and to sort of to turn a virgin forest into one that becomes old growth. So she's very much concerned about that. The piece on the right, this French artist, Roussel, creates these grass installations in the shape of human beings. And they are really asking us to think about the centrality of food, and that food and our bodies, the origins of food and so forth, goes beyond that. It goes to the transportation, the impact on the land and so forth, but wanting us to become more observant of what and how we eat makes us more sensitive to the sort of the food cycles of the world. And also bringing attention to any of the famine that exists that may be outside of our purview. And this is made up of soil and wheat seeds and recycled material and so forth. This is an interesting character, the wee man from the Eden Project, which is in Devonshire in the UK. And WE stands for waste, electrical, and electronic equipment. And these are huge. They're 7 meters, so that's about 21 feet. And they're made from 3,000 tons of waste, electrical, and electronic equipment, which is about the average, what the average citizen in the UK will throw away in a lifetime. So again, to help us become aware of the waste that's maybe out of sight, out of mind, and to hopefully make us think about waste reduction. This artist thinks about our reusing materials and wants us to kind of re-examine our relationship to the world, and feels very sad about the discarded objects. And in creating this piece, the artist is kind of using brush strokes, using discarded material as brush strokes, and imagining a whale swimming in an ocean. But he believes that there's spirits, that everything has spirits, even plastic and aluminum and hardware, wire, and things that he uses. And so it's not only the sense of reusing it, but it's having that relationship to things that we think might be less recyclable. Now, I know we've been looking at some doom and gloom. This is some more playful stuff, which is kind of nice as a change. And Haruki's work is quite fun, using a Japanese paper cutting technique. Big following for Haruki on these Pringles. So the next time you get Pringles, you'll have something to do with them. And then Tomita's forest series, done a ton of different animals using things that have been trashed, whether it's broken kitchenware, discarded cans, motorcycle parts, cylinders, what have you. In the artist's words, each of these things, which we usually use every day, once had a story until they were thrown away. They are bicycles that were once ridden, broken dustpans, signboards from loan sharks, lost umbrellas. Every object had purpose and meaning before they were tossed away. Taking these things that I collect them and create new life for them. Fun stuff. This is kind of interesting, getting back to function, but really thinking about the environment. And Jiromenjenko blends art, engineering, environmentalism, biochemistry to create experiments and real life possibilities to enable social change. This office tree I find very fascinating. It's for a couple of reasons. I mean, it's a working space that essentially, in her mind, is owned by the tree, really conveying the sense that trees have rights, and which is interesting, just having read the overstory. But so that the trees have rights just like we do. And if we think that way, then we might be a little bit more careful about how we interact with the environment. So it's constructed of grading and sliding, transparent surfaces, being very considerate of the tree around it. And each of these offices have on-site power generation and Wi-Fi that use sensors to self-monitor and track user engagement. And so those who use it will pay a membership fee, but the profits go directly into improving the tree's well-being, soil health, increasing pollinator access, maybe sending the tree's saplings off to good tidings. The piece on the right is another one of hers called The Pharmacy, and that's really looking at environmental health, kind of similar to health clinics, but in this case, they're environmental clinics. And so these are soil-filled planters and just increasing the green canopy in an environment to improve air quality on the one hand, and on the other is to providing food for the neighborhood. And one of her goals is to reduce food miles and fertilizers and pesticides, and have people think about what the relationship between environment and health and food consumption. The piece on the left is exactly what it says. It is a tower that acts as a giant air filter, kind of like a vacuum cleaner to create more urban skies and getting rid of some harmful particles. So at the top of it, when it goes through the cycle, it's about 75% cleaner than before. This is about 20 to 25 feet tall, and it works by using static electricity and sort of sucking it up. And then the studio, this guy's studio, creates jewelry from the smog particles that are collected in this tower. I guess compressing carbon-filled smog and making things like rings and cufflinks. And here it's well, obvious and maybe not so obvious messages. David Buckland was very inspired by 19th century explorers and the whole idea of an expedition, and these inkjet print projections on glaciers are sending out a very strong message, and thinking of art as interrogating the future and wanting to engage us very directly, and documenting more remote landscapes and making them profound experiences as we witness them. He does some great collaborative work too, organizing scientists, artists, and educators, raising awareness. And some of these are incredibly collaborative, which I really appreciate. Well, here you have it. Some of us, we all like to fly, and we all don't like the carbon footprint we make by flying. Well, this Argentinian Thomas Sorrentino is looking at sun-powered aerial beings, and has the record of one that does not use fossil fuel, solar panels, helium, or batteries, and only is using solar and infrared radiation to keep these afloat, and of course the wind. And there's a record for these for over 2 hours. They were airborne, gliding on wind currents and so forth. So he really is in that process that I think that maybe 50, 100 years from now, we'll be looking back like the Wright brothers did, trying to be fossil-free aerial transportation. The one on the left, he's fascinated with spider webs and kind of the mobility, and thinking about how we might look at different inhabitants and how we would inhabit spaces differently. So he's created these kind of geometric shapes with steel joints and steel cables and so forth, with the inviting visitors or viewers to go in and out, similar to some of the works that we've looked at before. And this is interesting too, really wanting to combine storytelling with raising our awareness, and thinking about First Nations, in this case in Quebec. And she was really concerned about the development of a golf course and condominium complex on Indigenous burial grounds. and thought about, well, how do we respond to this? And so she thought about the sort of the Aboriginal indigenous voice and asked people to directly respond and call out their concerns and their protests. And again, very collaborative, but aligned with the indigenous view of looking at Earth as a female body, and the oral traditions that are so critical in indigenous culture. So the connections here are really just to relate more to the Earth in a very much more of a personal way. And this piece is fairly well traveled now. We've gone to various different indigenous land claims. Stacy Levy's work, these are works that were in a museum, and she was concerned about us when we move through various buildings and structures, whether it's a museum or a library for that matter, we don't think about the plot underneath it. And she wanted to create these steel stems, I think there's like 13,000 of them, to remind us of the land that existed before, in this case, the museum was built. It was a vacant lot. And so wanting to have us just remember that. So this was an installation piece, as was this, which is really taking a look at the watershed, and where you're walking through this gallery with about 1,000 gallons of water collected locally, having a variety of different students and adults work together to collect the water, and thinking about the watersheds nearby. And I'm trying to think of where this was. Delaware, Maryland, maybe Maryland. Yes, it was in Maryland, the Towson watershed in Maryland. And this is a quote from her. Our waterways are like capillaries across the land, carrying water from sky to sea. The same branching pattern as our blood vessels, the watershed carries the lifeblood of our planet. Nowadays, we know our roads far better than our waterways. By not knowing where the water flows, we fail to protect it. So in conclusion, what about environmental art? What about eco art? How does it raise, does it awaken our imagination and sensibilities? It certainly ideally engages new ways of knowing. I mean, eco art is not going to solve our ecological issues, but ideally, hopefully, it might allow us to think and feel ways that we wouldn't necessarily otherwise. And some of the things that I was struck by in looking at these is how much it's about building community resilience and how collaborative some of these pieces are. And it almost in that sense, thinking about that megaphone and voices is the creating of community voice. How do we have our voice? How do we locate that deep understanding of belonging, as a community? And as I mentioned, a lot of these are interdisciplinary and just getting out of our silos to think more holistically. It's hard not to think politically when we are wanting to make significant changes in our ecological practice. And then oftentimes we think of going back to that image of ego versus echo, the idea that we are nature. We're not separate from nature, and that the more that we can recognize the humility of being just a part of the nature, I think the more that we can probably make a difference. So that is my presentation. Hopefully there were things that you could take away and think about, and maybe there is some ideas for how we as a community or maybe individually you can bring back to those you work with and live with. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and see everybody. And so thank you all for
Thank you.
so
That
does
was
anybody have it?
illuminating. Illuminating in itself. You mentioned illuminating, and I think that was really great. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? I'll let you field them, Jonathan, if that's okay.
I might be hitting you up for some lesson ideas for K through 5 in this. Just saying.
Well, I figured, Sue, there was a couple of things there that would be inspiring for you.
I wrote it all down, and I might need you to be my mentor and a lesson I have in my head.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Well, hopefully, now that I have my second vaccine, I can come and visit.
I'm April 5th. You can come and visit after April 5th.
Okay, good. So any other comments or questions or ideas that people have?
I really appreciated the rich variety of it. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Linda. I mean, there's so many great environmental artists and eco artists. And my challenge was to not overwhelm you, but to kind of pick and choose ones that might just be representative of different medium and different themes and collaborations and so forth. So, yeah.
Anami, I noticed you unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a question. It seems to me that some of the projects take an extraordinary amount of things to make. Yes, and create more waste in the doing of it. You make more waste. So there's, with some of them, there's a contradiction. Whereas if I look, for instance, at the photograph of Botinsky, just to show the vast stretches of stuff that we throw away, I think it's more effective than making something different, just to show the reality, some of it.
I really like what you're saying, because if I'm understanding it, is that even if we recycle material into creating art, we're not necessarily getting at the root of the problem. That is that we're still consuming things that we throw away, that we then build and create, but they're still around, rather than using less. Am I interpreting that correctly, Anne-Marie?
Yes, and also I think some of the projects themselves, you need a lot of, like, the wrapped island or the wrapped Reichstag in Germany, all that stuff that gets used to wrap something, so. But
Yes.
I had an experience many years ago. I was on the west coast of Turkey, and it was very idyllic. And in earlier times, there were sort of middens where people would throw stuff, okay? And it was all like ceramic or glass, or it became part of the soil. Whereas nowadays, people still throw stuff away as if they would become part of the earth. And they don't, I saw in these nooks and crannies along the shore, big plastic bags with trash. So we have still, at least in some places, we have old habits of discarding things, but now we have different discardable things that will not self-destruct.
This is kind of a question for anybody, but do you think that Chris Jordan's pieces can make a difference in terms of what we consume. Those are the pieces where the airplane paper cups and the plastic bags and the aluminum cans. Do you think that just by sheer numbers, that's an effective way for us individually to reflect on
Yes.
what we consume?
I think so, but I don't think it influences big business and companies, that make them. We might use a little bit less, but it needs to change from a systemic way, not just
Yeah.
individual reduction.
Yeah.
If you,
Yeah, and I think you're so right, because it definitely is a political systemic issue. And one of the questions that I ask myself is how do we raise awareness, and both how is my awareness raised, and what do I think are effective ways to influence those who make decisions, whether they're industries or politicians. And people can read about the environmental challenges. You could hear podcasts about it. But then I believe that sometimes visual images can raise certain emotional responses that words may not. And maybe that's, I don't know if that'll change that systemic way, but I think we need to think more broadly in terms of how to influence the decision makers.
Yeah, I believe.
I think that's the whole point of this. Like, if you can illustrate, if they can see it, you can talk yourselves blue, politics, right, left, whatever. But if you can see it, that means something different. Like, put it out there so they can. Okay, look at all this trash floating up in this art we've made from it. But I think that if you don't illustrate it or put it out there for everybody to see in whatever iteration they need to see it in, do you know what I mean? Like what you were saying, Jonathan, if you can see what we're doing to the planet via art, photography, whatever it is, it might resonate different than saying, oh, you're on the right wing, you're on the left wing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I think sometimes when we look at those photograph images from the earth above, it gives us a broader perspective.
Exactly. So it's not political. It's what's happening.
It's what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
if you saw giant 18-wheelers driving down the highway with that aerial image of all of the disposed of cell phones, and at first it looks pretty, and as you get closer and closer and realize what it is, it would be such a dramatic thing. It's hard to unknow something that you figure out on your own, like puzzle pieces. I remember in Canada seeing, and where was I? In other countries, maybe New Zealand, seeing very, very large images of something that you couldn't figure out from a distance. And once you figure it out, you go, oh my God, what is it? How can that be? And that's, I would like to see a little more education done that way, but I wouldn't know where to begin suggesting that it happen.
It's kind of like illustration through shock, right?
Yes.
A little bit.
But yeah, I mean, because there's usually kind of billboards on buses. What would happen if you had some of those images on buses? I think that's, or big, huge trucks and so forth. Yeah.
They're usually realtors.
Right, they're usually realtors, which is ironic because it's about the land. Yeah. Well, Margaret, thank you for the, sorry.
Oh, I just was going to say, I hope that you'll let us share your slides and the recording on the library website, because I think there's a lot of people who would enjoy or feel benefit, feel moved by watching this presentation. So I know I was, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much for such a thoughtful, moving presentation. It was really eye-opening for me, for sure. So I really appreciate it.
I agree. Were your other talks recorded like this so that perhaps we could see them?
That you'd have to ask the senior center, because they
Right.
were the ones who
Oh, okay.
recorded
Okay.
them.
Thank you for
Um,
so much for doing this. It was very eye-opening. It's hard to ignore this stuff once
Yeah.
you've seen pictures like this.
Well, thank you. And I apologize that we had a little bit of technological challenges midway through. And
No
I thought,
problem.
You
well,
took it in stride.
and I thought,
You were
Margaret,
very
that
gracious.
I thought that last piece where they planted those stems to thinking about the land that the library is on, maybe we can
Mhm.
honor that
Yeah.
you know, in some way. It might be an interesting project.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Absolutely. Well, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, you can contact the library and we can send them along to Jonathan, and we'll have the slides and the recording on our website shortly as well. So thanks so much. We really
Okay,
appreciate it.
thank you all.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
Yeah.
you very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good
thanks so
night.
much. Take care.
Thank you from Windsong.
Oh, Winsong, so nice to
Hi.
see you. I miss seeing you.